This newly updated Titan Arc Thundercrash build melts everything. You're going to be running around getting pretty much faster grenades, faster abilities in general, you're going to have an increase to DPS from multiple sources, and you're basically just going to become the true Arc God. Now Arc Titans are good, but this season, they just got stronger. Because with the new seasonal artifact perks in place, we can now develop this build further into that Arc subclass specifically by using a bunch of those juicy artifact perks. Which means that we're going to be able to jolt enemies consistently, we're going to be able to generate special and heavy ammo frequently, and we're going to be able to chain DPS between our abilities and our Arc weapons to make this build extremely lethal inside of endgame PvE. And what I like most about this build is that you're not restricted to using specific exotics. So this build is flexible for pretty much all players, so you could run this build with a Cuirass of the Fallen Star, a Heart of Inmost Light, a Skullfort, or literally whatever you want to run, and the build will run exactly the same. Because this build is designed from the use of our subclass aspects and fragments in combination with our seasonal perks. And actually, unlike a lot of other builds, this is a build you kinda want to use in endgame content rather than easier content, because you want to constantly be damaging tough enemies with your pulse grenade, so that that grenade can generate enough ionic traces so that you can get it straight back. And that's going to be important since our monochromatic perk in the artifact is going to increase the DPS of our weapons and abilities, and you're just going to be chaining between those two things on a loop. Now guys, if you like this one, then a rating is much appreciated, and consider subscribing if you want to see more builds like this, because I do cover builds every week here on the channel, which you can find in the playlist down below, so be sure to check that out later when you get a sec. Now in terms of this build and the way it flows in easier content, you'd run in and throw a grenade at a bunch of enemies. This will either kill them or damage them, generating ionic traces. You'll then get energy back while also having a DPS increase to your arc weapons. Go around killing adds with that arc weapon, then you have a damage increase to your abilities. And you just loop between the abilities and the weapons with that constant damage buff. You'll often generate arc orbs, which you can throw for a chance to get heavy ammo. And you'll also spawn normal orbs as you're just going about your day killing stuff, which you'll use to get your abilities back faster. And you will get those abilities back quite often as long as you keep hitting enemies with those grenades, and in general just using your other abilities and picking up the orbs of power. In harder content you'll do the same thing, except you'd usually throw your grenade on champions and bosses while damaging them with a good arc special or heavy weapon for a DPS boost. There isn't really a right or wrong way of using this build other than just trying to use the pulse grenade on enemies that have a lot of health so that you can get it back faster from those ionic traces. The only thing that will change the way you use this build will be the exotic armor, so I do have a few recommendations, and the first one is Cuirass of the Fallen Star. This is the exotic I'm using and the one I went with for this build setup, so you can change it if you want to. You don't have to use this one, but as a solo player I like that extra damage on bosses, so using Cuirass will give me that extra damage for the Thundercrash so that I can melt a boss a little quicker if not instantly, because this super has and always will be one of the best Titan supers to use in the game. Other exotic alternatives to use are the Heart of Inmost Light. You'd use this one for faster abilities and to make them more powerful, but since this got nerfed a while back, I tend to avoid using this, but it's better than having nothing on at all, since it will buff the damage and recharge rate of abilities, so I'd still suggest keeping hold of one. You also have the Armentarium. This one is good for just having that extra grenade charge. Synthoceps, always a good choice if you want to buff your melee damage. ACD Feedback Fence. Now don't take my word on this, because I haven't yet tested this, but I hear that it is doing really good right now this season, so I might look into making a separate build of that later on, so it is worth holding on to as well. And the last one I recommend is the Skullfort, since arc melee ability kills will trigger health regen, but also restore your melee ability. So it pairs really well with the Thunderclap melee, especially in harder content. But for this build design specifically that I have in place, I am going to be going with the Cuirass, so that we can have that increased damage with our Thundercrash super. So for our super, you're going to want to run the Thundercrash. Then for our dodge, it is going to be the Thruster, mostly for the reduced cooldown, because we'll use that often to help get our grenade back quicker, which we'll get to in a bit. But for the melee, I'm going with the shoulder charge one, which will blind enemies, so it is also an unstoppable melee too. Then the grenade we're going with is going to be the Pulse Grenade, one of my favourite grenades in the game, and we'll use this to stun overloads too by using a fragment Spark of Shock so that your arc grenades jolt targets, and that jolt damage will cause overloads to be stunned, so it just works really well to stop those overloads, which can get really annoying sometimes, especially when they don't stun when using things like an overload hand cannon, so it just helps a lot more. For the aspects, I'm using Touch of Thunder, so our Pulse Grenade creates ionic traces as it damages targets and increases in damage over time, and those ionic traces will give us ability energy, which basically means as long as the grenade is hitting something constantly like a champion, it's going to almost get you that grenade straight back, or at least be pretty close to it, which is what I like a lot. But for the second aspect, I'm using knockout, so that critically wounding a target or breaking a shield infuses your melee attack, increasing its range and damage, but also defeating targets with that melee starts health regen and makes us amplified. It was either that or the Juggernaut, which I didn't really feel like using, so it is up to you, but I just prefer the knockout aspect. For fragments, as I mentioned, we have the Spark of Shock to jolt enemies with our grenades, Spark of Magnitude so that the grenade has an increased duration, Spark of Recharge so that while we are critically wounded, our melee and grenade regenerate more quickly, and Spark of Discharge so that our arc weapon final blows have a chance to spawn an ionic trace. Now you can swap this one or the Spark of Recharge if you want to with anything else. You could use a Spark of Ions to create more ionic traces, but you just don't really need to because the Pulse Grenade will do that anyway. And you could also use the Spark of Amplitude to create orbs on rapid kills, but again we have another way to do that, so this season being amplified isn't going to benefit as much anyway, unless you use the Spark of Beacons so that you could use this to blind enemies, and maybe even pair this with a Forbearance GL so that you basically have an arc special weapon with increased damage, and it would also be blinding ads too, so it could be a pretty good combo to use. In the artifact, I'm using the Elemental Orbs Arc so that we can generate arc orbs on arc weapon kills, and those orbs when thrown will jolt enemies, and I really do like these orbs a lot this season. They do make some interesting builds, but the next perk you want is going to be Elemental Fury, so that stunned champions take bonus damage from your abilities. Pairs really well with the Overload Pulse Grenade, but we also have communal pickups for a bit of protection from allies who use our orbs, refreshing pickups for the extra energy to our abilities when picking up orbs, and monochromatic so that we can chain between our grenades and arc weapons for a damage boost. You do also want the elemental munitions so that you can spawn heavy and special ammo on orb kills, but as of making this video during the day 1 raids contest mode, Bungie have disabled it, so once it's re-enabled, slot this one on if you can, because it will do you a lot of favours. Moving on though, weapon choices I recommend are a Thunderlord, great weapon all round, any arc machine gun, mostly because we have overload machine guns this season, so it just makes sense to use one, a Hothead rocket launcher, great rocket, Ikelos SMG for the energy slot, a Forbearance, a Loaded Question, or any Arc Fusion that's better than the one that you might have. And you could even use the new Exterius seasonal exotic that we got this season. Pairs really well with this build since we are a dedicated arc build, but either way this build is pretty flexible, so you can just use any arc weapon of your choice. Just make sure that you are running arc weapons to make the most out of the build and its increased DPS buffs. But as for the mods, in the helmet I'm running 2 heavy ammo finders and an arc cipher mod to generate orbs of power. In the arms I'm running 2 grenade kickstarts to get grenade energy when we use it. Chest I have my damage resist mods. Legs I have an absolution and 2 innovations for reduced cooldown. You can use your arc scavenger mod if you want to, and you probably should if you are going into endgame content, but for the class I'm just running a distribution and 2 bombers for that reduced cooldown for the grenade, so we are just getting that grenade back so much faster than normal. If you do want to really invest into this build, I'd focus your stats into all 3, the resilience, discipline and strength, for that triple 100 ability build, because if you can achieve that then you're really going to have those abilities back like there's no tomorrow, and it just makes the build so much better to use. Anyway, as always, here is the full artifact setup for Season of the Witch, and again the full mod screen setup, but don't be afraid to say hi to the dim link that I have down below. But honestly guys, a really strong build I recommend you set up and update for Season of the Witch in Destiny 2 this season. But if this isn't the build for you, then remember to check out the full playlist down below for more, and I'll see you guys over in that next build video. Peace out guys.